Okay, ready for our next session? A famous Native American proverb says, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." Next year, in March 2022, the Sustainable Building Israeli Standard, aka the Green Building Standard, will become mandatory after being voluntary for more than 15 years. To celebrate this occasion, we will dedicate the next hour to discuss ways for building a sustainable world. One aspect of sustainability is construction, is the circular economy, which is the topic of our first live panel. I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists and invite them to the stage. I'm honored to say that you will now listen to 4 academic researchers who are also entrepreneurs and leaders in the construction industry. And this is part of the unique DNA of the Startup Nation, combining research and tachlis, which means the real thing in spoken Hebrew. Please welcome Dr. Sella, the CEO of ECOncrete, with over 20 years of experience in marine biology and ecology. Dr. Sella is an industry leader in the ecological enhancement of coastal and marine infrastructure. His company brings biological expertise to bridge coastal development and sustainability. Ido earned a PhD in zoology and an MSc in ecology and environmental quality from Tel Aviv University. Professor Shany Barath, director of D.Dlab at Technion IIT and co-founder of Shaga Architects. Shany has been an architect and an entrepreneur for almost 20 years. Her studio combines unique planning technology with planning expertise and leads global projects in England, China, and Israel. Adi Magar, the CEO of IRMI. Adi is a PhD student at Porter School of Environment and Earth Sciences, Faculty of Exact Sciences in Israel, and a serial entrepreneur. She is a construction waste treatment consultant for the government and private sector, the founder and chair of IRMI, the Israeli Raw Materials Innovation Forum, the co-founder of Eden, a wood recycling factory. Dr. Tomer Fishman is an assistant professor and a researcher at IDC. His research is focused on understanding the materials that accumulate in society as buildings, infrastructure, products, and how they affect and interact with society, the economy, and he looks for the potentials of win-win between material consumption, economic activity, technology, and development that could lead to a more circular economy. They will all discuss the circular economy as a catalyst to construction tech. To moderate this panel, I'm happy to invite Maya Trajtenberg Madar, a member of the Deloitte Catalyst Tel Aviv team and the domain manager of PropTech Industry 4.0 and Energy at Deloitte. Maya is also a former executive in the Israeli Green Building Council, ILGBC. Take it from here.
Thank you, Aviv. Hi to all, and welcome to one of the most important sessions of this conference. COVID-19 crisis has shed light on another well-known crisis that has the potential of exponentially harming humanity to a point of no return, and that is, of course, global warming. The construction ecosystem uses almost half of the world's material extracted every year. Moreover, buildings and construction account for more than 35% of global final energy use and nearly 40% of energy-related CO2 emissions. One of the ways to, of course, minimize the global warming effect is to move to a circular economy. But before we dive deeper into this, we talked about COVID-19 just a little bit. And in the past year, we have become well aware of the negative effects that bacteria and viruses have on our lives. But can we look at it in a different perspective, maybe in a positive way? Shany, please share with us how your research brings an innovative angle into new buildings methods.
Okay. Thank you, Maya, for the question. It's really a pleasure to be part of this panel. It's interesting because, first of all, I'm an architect. And it's funny that an architect gets asked about viruses. But this is exactly where I think the interesting part comes. I think that COVID in the past year and a half has actually demonstrated in the best way what disruption is. So we've gone through technological disruptions and through disruptions in the way that we think that I think are starting to be also implemented, both in practice, but also in research and academia. So I'm a practitioner that became an academic and founded a lab at the Technion, which is called D.Dlab, Disrupt Design. And we were looking for moments of disruption in, I would say, conventional, both manufacturing technologies, but also in data infrastructures. And one of the projects that we recently initiated as part of a consortium was a wonderful win that we had within Horizon 2020, which is called Ecolopes. Ecolopes is ecological envelopes. And Ecolopes proposes quite a radical idea and says, why can't the building envelope become a living entity, which not only belongs to the human beings that inhabit the interior of the buildings, but also inhabit animals and plants and also microbiome. Now, this is maybe a bit of a sci-fi scenario, but within our context, what we did is we generated a wonderful consortium of experts. So this is a project that is done with experts from TU Vienna, from TU Munich, from the University of Genoa, and also with a software company, McNeil. And the idea is that we're currently working on workflows, on data workflows that are able to take predictive algorithms of the different entities, the different stakeholders of the building envelope, so plants, animals, microbiomes, and human, and bring them within a formulated aspect of some kind of a building block, some kind of a structure that we can incorporate within a building. We just started this. In the Technion, I'm collaborating on this together with Professor Yasha Govman and together with an ecologist, Asaf Schwartz. So this is one of the aspects of what we see is that we're actually shifting from from single disciplinary to multidisciplinary consortium, where we're really able to start to disrupt knowledge in each one of the different aspects. I think that coming from the other angle is that while here we're talking about more of a virtual infrastructure, a software that we're developing that is geared towards building envelopes and building blocks that are soil-based. In the laboratory at the Technion, physically, our facility, which has industrial robots and also large 3D printers, we're developing also soil-based additive manufacturing and looking into renewable materials and natural materials that we can start to convert into building elements. So the idea is that we're coming from an information-centric process and a material-centric process, and we're trying to somehow superposition them together to find new solutions that we can hopefully make applicable. So I think this is my perspective maybe on this topic.
Where did you get inspired of different industries that have done the same?
Well, the thing is that because I come from practice into academia, the idea of sharing and also, the idea of advisors within a project and understanding that not all the knowledge sits within one's head is quite common to me. And I find it also, this is why we wake up in the morning. We wake up in order to have meaning in what we do. And I know that sounds very cliche, but within these kind of topics, step at a time, we make progress, we create knowledge, and we also find ways of implementation. And it could be that the implementation won't actually be within my discipline, will be in one of the other disciplines, but that's already value. And I find that quite interesting.
Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Talking about new building methods raises the need to rethink how we resource, design, manufacture, transport, repair, even recycle, and every step of the construction process. As an example, we can talk about concrete, one of the most ancient material that has been used and has a lot of negative effect on the environment. But Ido, please share with us how you found it to create an impact on circular economy.
There's two things. First of all, thank you for inviting me. There's two things that I would like to start. First of all, and actually copying you. So I'm a biologist dealing with concrete, and generally I don't like concrete. As marine biologists, we see concrete structure as as an infrastructure that go into the water that is not basically can support biology in a proper way. And when we focusing on that, we saw that if you look at the statistics, 70% of coastal infrastructure worldwide are concrete-based. Taking into account that 50% of us, all of us, are residing along coastlines, this is a lot of infrastructure in the water. There's a lot of concrete in the water. As people that want to deal with the problem, we decided to tackle concrete. And I think that in order for two marine biologists that decided to tackle this issue, we looked for the vectors that will allow us to talk with the industry, which is a very conservative industry. And one of the best vectors we found was architects, because they're open-minded and they allow for new technologies to be there, and they specify it really early in the process. Taking into account, we work in a very conservative industry. All the changes are very slow. If you come as a biologist to an engineer and you're starting to talk to him, the first thing they will do is shut the door in your face, and you need to find ways to work in this. And what we do in ECOncrete is very simple. We develop a technology that we can modify concrete that comply with all the requirements for coastal marine construction, but at the same time provide a better habitat for biology, which means we can now have working waterfronts like ports, breakwaters, industrial waterfronts, piping system that can support biology in a similar way to the natural reef nearby, not exactly the same, but gaining more and more what we call ecosystem services. And if we look at our urban waterfronts or working waterfronts, we are losing more and more and more of those natural resources. If we'll not find a way to modify our infrastructure to support biology, we're going to lose a lot of what we call the biodiversity and the filtration process, the interaction of people with the water. This is what we do with ECOncrete. We do it worldwide. We apply the technology in different projects, in different applications. And it's based on making sure that we can go into the process in a very, very smooth way, allowing for all the method of concrete casting to be done in the same way, but the end result will be better for the biology. And I think if we want to touch about the circular economy, there's a lot of discussion of the material and the process of the material, and then its servicing, and then what we're doing after. When we're talking about coastal infrastructure, we're talking about infrastructure that is basically on product that's supposed to be active in the water or active in its environment for 60 to 120 years design life. This is a long time that this product is going to be exposed to the elements, and I think what is important in those type of products is that we're going to also look at how they function through their life. It's a crucial part of what we call, if we look at the circular economy, to start with looking at the end and understanding how we close the loop after we are taking it apart, but also how it functions through its lifespan. And I think this is what we bring into the industry.
Super unique. Do you think that you're going to get out of the water to the dry land and try to have applications there?
We're starting. We're really focusing on marine environment. We're now going into estuarine and freshwater. We also have some applications that can be done above water. But if you look at the impact, and we're a company that's basically an impact, want to create an impact, want to change, it will not happen on land. The big, huge change will be happening in the sea. And so most of our focus there, and if things are progressing, a part of an R&D, we're always happy to put them into the market.
Thank you. Thank you, Ido. So we all know that in order to create sustainable and profitable companies, the value chain begins in the raw materials. That's the area where you operate, Adi. If you can please share with us what changed in the raw materials of the construction industry, and what is the potential for it for startups to explore and innovate?
Okay, so thank you very much, Maya, for the question, and thank you for, oh, yes, sorry. First time. Thank you very much for the organizers for inviting me, and thank you, Maya, for the question. Let me go back to Israel ecosystem. We're part of the ConTech ecosystem, and actually Israel has today 9 million residents, and we're going to have 10 million residents in just 2 years. Actually, in 2048, 100th anniversary of Israel, we're going to have 15 million people. So living here in a very small country, it's a lot of pressure on not just space, urban spaces, but also how can you build from, or from what, or from which kind of materials. So in order to go to mining processes of taking those raw materials and create from them products, structures, buildings, infrastructure, we need to calculate it. We need to understand more about it. So that's the reason I initiated IRMI, the Israeli Raw Material Innovation Forum, 3.5 years ago. And I published my first book. Part of this panel is a part of it in this book. First ever interview with people who are promoting innovation in raw materials in the sea, in the land, and maybe in the future in space. Actually, raw materials is more complicated because we're not just talking about natural raw materials, we also talk about recycled and how we can reuse recycled aggregates, which is one of my expertise. I'm in this field for over 20 years, and I've worked with government entities and municipalities about how they can implement and reuse those recycled aggregates in infrastructures and buildings. And of course, implement new raw materials, as we just heard. So I think Israel is very well challenged, not just because of the pressures, but also the impact, right? We're talking about sustainability. So in order to produce those raw materials, we're actually creating damage or environmental hazards. So we have to take them in account when we do that. So we have to do it very carefully. So my passion is in materials, but I have to say that I'm really proud of the whole ecosystem of the new raw materials. And as you mentioned, the startups, ConTech, the construction technology startups ecosystem, just published a year ago that we have 24 new raw materials startups in Israel. But last year we had only 10. So we see the growth in it, and we see the potential for investors to come over, take a look, not just what happened in the academia, in practice, in Israel, but also abroad. So I'm quite happy and proud to be part of it, but I do think we have a lot of challenges to do, to go to. So this is my, this is what I want to say.
Sure. Thank you. We all know that challenges are accelerator for innovation. And I think this is why Israel is super interesting to look at in that perspective. Where do you think that Israel needs to invest most of its time and efforts, of course?
Okay, this is a very complicated question. But I will say that I kind of hear investors coming over or talking to me about plant-based materials. They're more interested in that, how we can create new things from either mushrooms or kinaf or hempcrete, and we do have great research about that. I see the potential in two ways. Of course, in the sea area, Israel doesn't have any islands, but maybe in the future. And also underground building. We have the biggest cemetery in the world in Jerusalem, and it's underground. So we do have to take a look also not just about the natural, but also other sand and other geologic materials we have underground. We have to take care of them to save our resources for our next generation, so do our best with those we have now. And that's where I think we're going to. Thank you.
Thank you. So with the amazing demand of thousands of buildings a day worldwide, please tell us about your research, Tomer, and how it supports to reduce emissions and increase reuse of construction materials in a way that enhances the circular economy.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you for having me here. It's such a pleasure.
The kind of research that we do is trying to look at the macro scale, not just an individual case study of one building or one city, but everything, the entire demand. And the reason for that is because the circular economy concept, talking about using less materials in a more sustainable way, getting more from less materials, requires a lot of effort from all different of these different perspectives, different sides. It would even be maybe unfair to ask a single individual company to do a circular economy concept on their own. It requires this collaboration between designers, architects, production companies that create materials, the construction industry itself, the users, and those that need to handle materials at the end of life. So what we do is look at the entire life cycle of materials, from their extraction through production and manufacturing to the building of buildings and infrastructure, and then the use
which could, as Ido said, could be decades, maybe even hundreds of years, and then at the end of life of those materials. And we look at these not just now, but long term, into the future. By 2050, which materials would be required? How many of them would be required, and where? Is it in countries like Israel, where, as Adi said, there is going to be increasing demand for the increasing population? Is it going to be different in other countries? And if so, what would be the mass of materials that are required? And then, once we know that, we can start asking, can we reduce the need for those materials? There are lots of different strategies to do that. One could be better design, so buildings last longer, and then we reduce demand for further buildings to replace them. Another strategy could be changing materials from ones that are more harmful to the environment to ones that are less harmful. And of course, there are strategies at the end of life to reuse the materials that we already have, basically to treat our buildings and infrastructures as material banks that will become available again in the future. Urban mining, to treat the city as a future potential mine of materials and put them back into use. All of these things require understanding of the materials themselves, but also of the economics of these materials, and even sometimes questions of policy, whether recycling or reuse is available, how to extend the life of buildings. Is it just a technical issue, or is it a social question of, are these buildings fulfilling their the reason for which they are existing? And sometimes it's even questions like, where will these materials come from? We try to integrate all of these questions and then run these simulations far into the future to see what would be these demands and these material cycles. And then if we can implement, say, a new technology, how is that going to change the effects, the impact on the environment, on society, but not just in one city, but at scale for the entire globe sometimes. In order to do that, we need to integrate a lot of different disciplines of study, and we need to talk with various people on the ground, but also in government, and to figure out where the actual trigger could occur to make this a more circular economy. In some cases, it even we ask funny questions like, these materials, who owns them? And if we want to reuse them in the future, and that means that they have some economic value, do the owners of the building own those materials too? Or is it the construction company that put them into the building? Is it the recycling company that takes those materials when they demolish the building and put it into reuse? There are lots of very funny questions, in a sense, that somebody needs to ask. But of course, that means that no one single factor or one single player can answer these questions. We need to take a step back, look at the entire life cycle of these materials, and figure out what would be the right way. So when we do that, we can get these big answers that can maybe tell us the pathway into these more sustainable circular futures.
Thank you, Tomer. I think you all shared so much knowledge and data within this table, but also outside. So how do you exchange knowledge? You all talked about how important it is to share, disciplines with others and researchers in Israel and abroad. Please share how you try to, talk to your colleagues and make this world a little better than what it is.
I can share that I'm teaching in Pittsburgh in the United States, and I'm trying to figure out how could I... sorry again. I'm teaching in Pittsburgh in the United States, a course for first degree students about not just sustainability, but also construction waste management, innovation in raw materials, and I bring Israeli experts from this ecosystem, from the ConTech ecosystem, and showing them what we're doing here. So we are sharing knowledge and experience, which I think is very, very important. And I think also this panel is an example of how we can be proud of what we're doing and share our knowledge and experience with other people around the globe. So again, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Maybe adding on that, I think we need to look, I'm a strong believer of the interaction between people that work together. So one of the most important thing I think is for groups from people from completely different disciplines to work together. We have our engineers talking with our biologists, talking with our designers and our scientific divers. All of them bring something into the discussion. At the end, you get this soup that sometimes is much more than anything you expected in before. We had issues that we were struggling for, basic economic of making a system work so it will be cost effective, and we're stuck and we're trying to reduce things we're starting to think that are very, very important and taking them out. And suddenly someone came up and said, you know what, if you save 2 hours of a forklift, you can save it. And suddenly you go for a completely different way of thinking, and I think it's super important in our industry to make sure we bring everyone into the table and hear everyone.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we can also add to that, I think the idea of dissemination in general is something that is extremely crucial when we even define the steps of how we understand the value of research itself and of projects and implementation of projects. So there's one thing creating the knowledge, but there's another thing of making knowledge accessible. And I think these are two roots that we are responsible to deliver within our work. So one thing is generating the right framework, so the expertise. It's really one of the most intricate and challenging things is to understand what are the types of expertise you need in order to generate an innovation, let's call it, or a disruption. But the other thing is, how do you make that innovation accessible for dissemination? And I think that is something that, through conferences that we do, through even through grant proposals, that we generate, through collaborations with industry, through failures and many, many failures, I think that we disseminate the knowledge.
So just.
I totally agree. I think that's the trick, basically. We need to find these win-win opportunities. And it turns out that with sustainability, it's more often the case that by saving materials, saving time, saving energy, and improving efficiency, we're doing these benefits both for the economic perspective and for the environmental perspective. The kind of research that we do tries to implement that and find these win-win scenarios. And when, for example, there is a new technology or a new way of designing things that comes along, we can immediately plug it into these big models that we have and see how those things could trigger an effect in the long run on the entire stock of buildings that will be needed in the future.
This is great. So we're almost at our time. If any of you can just give a small tip to the entrepreneurs and stockholders that are watching us right now and experience failure, what can they have as a tip in the sustainable world in your perspectives? Fail a lot.
Be ready for challenges. I think it's true for the entrepreneurs and specifically for the people who invest in those entrepreneurs. In this industry, you need to find people that will back you up when issues are coming up. As we talk about scaling up, also the mistakes are much more expensive, and you need to find the right people to support you.
Yeah. I agree, and I think we need to be modest. People who want to join us needs to be modest and needs to be open-minded, but also hearing and listening, and also take responsibility. If you want to take part in this experience, be responsible for what you do. Either it's a research, either it's the practical world, be responsible for it.
So we're just at the end of our time. I'd like to thank again the great panelists. I know I learned a lot today. I'm sure you all did as well. Thank you and enjoy the rest.